Hello everybody and welcome back to the Commander Tribe Elder. Today we're going to take another look at one of my personal decks. This one I call the Anti-Tribal Equation. It's because everybody wants to tack a tribal tag onto this, and there are none. Period. This is not a tribal deck in any way, shape, or form. And there is some math involved. So let's go ahead and get started. The commander of the deck is Torbran, Thane of the Fell. He's 1 and 3 red for a 2/4. He's a dwarf noble, legendary creature. If a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent opponent controls, it deals damage +2 instead. So we're going to be doing a lot of small damage that's going to add up. First off, and as always, the mana base, it's 36 total lands. I did get a War Room. Thank you, you know who, for recommending it. Great card. You tap it for a colorless, and you could pay 3 and tap it, and pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color, which will be 1, and you draw a card. So it'll help us smooth out draws. I have one of the lands that'll turn into a creature. You just pay 1 and a red, and it'll turn into a 2/1 red warrior, but it's still a land, and it has first strike. The Dwarven Mine, as it enters the battlefield, it is either tapped, or if you have 3 mountains, it's untapped, and if you have the 3 mountains untapped, or the 3 mountains, that it creates a 1/1 red dwarf creature token. Cycling land. And then, yes, the rest are just basic mountains. I do not, as of yet, have the land that turns all my lands into lightning bolts, but that would be a definite shoe-in here. Let's go ahead and get started with the boring stuff. And this might seem like not that much ramp, but there's ramp hidden in the deck elsewhere, part of some of the other segments. The first one is Wayfarer's Bauble. It's 1. You pay 2, tap, sacrifice it. You search your library for a basic land card. Put that card into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Sol Ring, 1. Tap, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Fire Diamond, pay 2. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it adds 1 red mana to your mana pool. Ruby Medallion is the really cool one here. It's 2, and all red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Almost everything in here is red. And Arcane Signet, it's 2. Tap it, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. So it seems like a small ramp package, but there are other things in here. And as for draw, we have probably one of my absolute favorite artifacts, Gaffer Orrery. It's 4. Each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. So untap, upkeep, you'll draw the 3, then you'll draw a 4th. So you're getting 4 cards if you have none in your hand. And playing a red deck that just wants to start burning through stuff, you're going to run out of cards fairly quickly. The next card is Browbeat. It's 2 and a red. It's a sorcery. Any player may have Browbeat deal 5 damage to him or her. If no one does, target player draws 3 cards. This is fun because in this deck, you're going to be having to make the choice of, okay, do I take 10 damage? Do I take 15 damage? Do I take 17 damage? Just to allow him to draw 3 cards. Some people will do it and just call it, but that can hit hard. And it's only 3 mana. It's beautiful. Tormenting Voice, it's 1 and a red. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. Risk Factor is the better brother to the Browbeat, because you get to target a particular opponent. So if you know somebody that's always going to say, oh yeah, I'll volunteer to take the damage, or you might be able to either kill somebody with it. But in any case, target player may have Risk Factor deal 4 damage to them. If that player doesn't, you draw 3 cards. So this is also not redirectable, whereas the other one is. It has target player, so technically it could be redirected to another player, whereas this one says you draw 3 cards. And it has Jumpstart. You may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other casts, then exile this card. So you can actually get this going twice, and that could add up to some damage and card draw. Reforge the Soul. It's a 3 red. Each player discards his or her hand, then draws 7. Has Miracle, which means if it's on the top card of your, or it's the first card that you draw in your turn, you can pay its Miracle cost, which in this one is 1 in a red, instead of paying its casting cost. Thrill of Possibility. It's 1 in a red. It's an instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card, and you draw 2 cards. This one could be ramp or technically draw, but it's a great card. It's Jessica's Will. It's 2 in a red. Sorcery. Choose one. If you control your commander as you cast the spell, you may choose both. Mode 1 is add 1 red mana for each card in target opponent's hand. And mode 2 is exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. So as long as you have your commander out, you can use that mana to cast those spells, which is really awesome. Now for our, quote, just getting out of there removal, I guess you would call it. Because let's face it, half this deck is removal. The first one is Tilbalt's Trickery. It's 1 in a red, and it's an instant. You counter target spell. That is words we have not seen very often in red at all. And even the 2 really good ones, Pyroblast and Hydroblast, are just counter blue spells. This says flat out counter target spell for 2 red mana. And I mean, there's other stuff afterwards, but still. It kind of chaos warps. You choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than that spell. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then they put the exile cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. So yeah, countering spells, it's sort of a chaos warp almost. Another one of my favorite removals is Shenanigans. It's 1 in a red. Sorcery, destroy target artifact. It has Dredge 1, which just means you can pull it from your graveyard and I believe you mill 1 from your library into your graveyard. And that's instead of drawing. I like it because it's recurable and it gets rid of those pesky artifacts. And of course, Chaos Warp. It's 2 in a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into his or her library, then reveals the top card of his or her library. If it's a permanent card, he or she puts it into the battlefield. So it gets rid of that immediate threat. And as I mentioned earlier, Pyroblast. I do not have a second Hydroblast, or else it would be in here too. You choose one, either counter target spell if it's blue, or destroy target permanent if it's blue. Sort of a draw card. It's the best tutor in red, ? Gamble. Search your library for a card. Put that card in your hand. Discard a card at random. Then shuffle your library. So you could lose it. You could not lose it. I tend to try to have a large hand when I do this. I don't have any of the traditional board wipes you would find in this type of deck. I do not have Pyrohamia, I believe it is. Pyrohamia. The one that you pay 1 and it deals, or red, and it deals 1 point of damage, and it costs 2 and 2 red. I wish I did. I need to find one. It would go in here great, because you can, just with your commander out, deal 9 points of damage to everybody else before you kill your commander. And you're just taking 3, which is a great trade-off. I do have Blasphemous Act, which is 8 in red. It costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield, and it deals 13 damage to each creature. So that's a lot of fun. I also do have Vandal Blast, where it doesn't target creatures, but a lot of the other stuff in this deck will. This hits all your opponent's artifacts. Either pay 1 red, destroy target artifact, or overload it for 4 and a red and destroy all your opponent's artifacts. I do have a couple utility cards. The first one is Footfall Crater. It's 1 red. You enchant a land. Enchanted land has tap, target creature gains trample and haste until the end of the turn, and you can also cycle this away if you don't need it. I'm not really too interested in the trample aspect. It's the haste for very, very cheap that I want, and we can use this on part of our non-tribal critters that we'll get to here in a second. My next utility card is Sulfuric Vortex. It's 1 red. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Sulfuric Vortex deals 2 damage to that player. If that player would gain life, that player gains no life instead. Yes, I could have put mana barbs in here. I find that people just want to kill you when that comes out. So I kind of replaced it for this. It's a little bit softer, but not as many people get ticked off and kind of tend to ignore this a little bit more. And thus, it gets more damage in. They're like, whatever, 2 damage, 4 damage every turn. I'm not dead right now. I'm not going to Cyclonic Rift. And you could argue that you could use the mana barbs to hedge off things like a Cyclonic Rift. I've found that they just kind of beat the snot out of you. At least in my meta, it doesn't work the way that it's supposed to work. But trust me, I've tried the mana barbs. I have. Speaking of awesome artifacts, this is definitely on my top list also. It's Isochron Scepter. It's 2 for an artifact. You imprint. When Isochron Scepter enters the battlefield, you may exile an instant card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand. Hint, nudge, nudge. Most of the instants and sorceries in here are 2 or less. And we'll get to those here in a second. You pay 2 and you tap. You copy the exile card. If you do, you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost, and that is important later. Being able to actually cast it. For a little bit of protection, always wear protection. Swiftfoot Boots. It's 2. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste, and it costs 1 to equip. And this is just another way of also protecting our commander, but also if we need to, we could put it on one of our non-tribal creatures and have it activate right away, move it over, have another one activate, move it over, have another one activate if we have the mana available to do so. So speaking of all those non-tribal creatures, because most of them are all in the same tribe. Not all of them, but most of them. And that is humans. But this is not a human tribal deck. It's not a pinger tribal deck either, because pinger is in a creature type, and thus it's not eligible to be called a tribe. The first one we have is, these are all my pingers. The first one we have is Fervent Paincaster. It's 2 and a red. It's a 3/1 human wizard. You tap it, it deals 1 damage to target player. You can exert it, it deals 1 damage to target creature. It is a 3/1, which is a little awkward for sakes of trying to keep it alive while using our lesser damage board wipes. So you'll probably lose this one a lot, but it's still fun to mess around with. The next one is Shock Sorcerer. It's 1 red for a human shaman. That's a 1/1. This one has haste already. And you tap it, deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Prodigal Pyromancer is 2 and a red. It's a 1/1 human wizard. You tap it, deals 1 damage to target creature or player. And these are all getting boosted up by Torbran to 3 every time we tap them, which is really nice. Cunning Spark Mage, it's 2 and a red for a 0/1. It has haste already. You tap it, deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Frost Wielder is 2 and 2 red. It's a 1/2. You tap it, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. If a creature dealt damage by Frost Wielder would be put into a graveyard, it remove it from the game instead. In other words, if it would die, instead exile it. Old card. It's from Kamigawa. Goblin Fireslinger. It's 1 for a Goblin Warrior that's a 1/1. You tap it, it deals 1 damage to target player. that is one thing you need to keep track of with this deck, is make sure you know what your pingers do, make sure you know what your planeswalkers do, because people get ticked at you if you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to deal point of damage to a creature, and it can't do that, because then you have to backtrack, etc., ditto. And just make sure you know what each of the creatures do. This is one of my favorites, and I also hate it too because it's so expensive. But it's 2 and a red for a 2/2. It's Brimstone Mage. It's a human shaman. Its level up is insane. It's 3 and a red. And with the first level and the second level, it's a 2/3. And you can tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. This would be kind of one of those that you put down, and then later on, when you have nothing else to do, you put the mana into it. Or if you get an influx of mana from like the Jessica's Will or something else, then you put the mana into leveling this up. You don't concentrate on, oh my gosh, I haven't put my 4 mana into my Brimstone Mage yet. Like, wait for when you're not doing much else. At level 3 plus, it becomes a 2/4, and it'll deal 3 damage to target creature or player after you tap it. So that's just tap and do 5 damage with our commander out, which is nice. Blister Spit Gremlin. It's 1 red for a 1/1 Gremlin. You pay 1, tap it. Blister Split Gremlin deals 1 damage to each opponent. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, untap Blister Split Gremlin. And that's one of the few reasons why the cast is important on the Isochron Scepter. Thermal Alchemist is 1 and a red for a 0/3 with Defender. Tap it. It deals 1 damage to each opponent. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, untap Thermal Alchemist. Again, that's another cast trigger. Spear Spewer. It's 1 red for a 0/2. It's a Defender. There we go. You tap it, it deals 1 damage to each player. So that's all my non-tribal creatures. Now for the next non-tribal section of my deck. Because I get this a lot. Oh, is that a tribal Chandra deck? No, it is not, because Chandra is not a creature type. Thus, it is ineligible for being called a tribal deck, or at least Chandra tribal. And even Chandra is a human, at least one of them. Anyhow, and actually, let's do this real quick. So this is Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. It's 1 red for a 2/2. Whenever you cast a red spell, untap Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. You tap Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. It deals 1 damage to target player. If Chandra has dealt 3 or more damage this turn, exile her, then return her to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. Guess what? If we have our commander out, this is 1 tap, because it boosts that damage up to 3, and that's all that it cares about, is the output of damage that it does before it flips. So your commander's out, you tap it, it deals 1 damage, gets +2, that's 3, and it flips over, and you can use it right away because you maintain priority. So it turns into Chandra Roaring Flame. You can have Chandra +1 to do 2 damage to target player, -2 to do 2 damage to target creature, or -7, and she comes with 4 loyalty, by the way. -7 is deal 6 damage to each opponent. Each player dealt damage this way gets an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, this emblem does 3 damage to you, and that can get turned into 6, that can get turned into 9, that can get turned into 11. Like, that's a really fun ability on there. So I did mention we have other forms of drawing and mana production, and it's mostly in here. This is one of the really good ones. Chandra Torch of Defiance. It's 2 and 2 red. Its loyalty is 4. +1, exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card. If you don't, Chandra Torch of Defiance deals 2 damage to each opponent. So we're drawing or we're doing damage. She has another +1 that's add 2 red mana. So we're also ramping. This one card just does so much work. I love it. -3 is 4 damage to target creature. And then -7 is you get an emblem with, whenever you cast a spell, this emblem does 5 damage to target creature or player. So again, with some of the damage modifiers we have not seen yet, this could be 5 damage. This could be 15 damage just for casting a spell. And again, the importance of Isochron Scepter saying cast. Next is Chandra Firebrand. It could deal, its loyalty is 3, Chandra Planeswalker, +1, deal 1 damage to target creature or player. -2, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose new copies. -6, she deals 6 damage to each of up to 6 creatures and or players. Chandra Heart of Fire, it's 3 red. Legendary Planeswalker Chandra, 5 loyalty counters. +1 is discard your hand. This is more card draw. Then exile the top 3 cards of your library until the end of the turn. You may play cards exiled this way. Her other +1 is 2 damage to any target. And her -9 is search your graveyard and library for any number of red instant and or sorcery cards. Exile them, then shuffle your library. You may cast them this turn. Add 6 red mana to your mana pool. Chandra Flamecaller. It's 4 red for a Chandra Planeswalker that has 4 loyalty counters on it. +1 is put 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste into the battlefield. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. The 0 is discard all cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1. So again, more draw, ripping through the deck. She has a -X, which is interesting. She deals X damage to each creature, so that's very flexible. Chandra Fire Artisan is 2 red for Legendary Planeswalker Chandra, 4 loyalty. Whenever 1 or more loyalty counters are removed from Chandra, she deals that much damage to target opponent or Planeswalker. +1 is exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. -7 is exile the top 7 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. Chandra Alkaloid of Flame is 1 red. Chandra Planeswalker, and she has 4 loyalty. Her 0 is put a loyalty counter on each red Planeswalker you control. All the Planeswalkers are red. Another 0 ability is create 2/1 red elemental creature tokens. They gain haste, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. And she has a -2. You may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. If that card would be put into the graveyard this turn, exile instead. Chandra Nalaar, she's a 3 red for a 6 loyalty Chandra Planeswalker. +1 is she does 1 damage to target player. -X, deal X damage to target creature. A -8, and she deals 10 damage to target player and each creature he or she controls. And then we threw this in just for S&Gs. Don't ask what that means. Chandra's Regulator, it's 1 and a red. Whenever you activate a loyalty ability of Chandra Planeswalker, you may pay 1. If you do copy that ability, you may choose new targets for the copy. This is great if you're throwing the emblems out. I just thought of that. Woof. You could pay 1 and tap, discard a mountain card or a red card and draw a card. So if you get stuck, you can use this. And the last Planeswalker is not a Chandra, but I think it fits even though it doesn't really synergize with the commander. But I want to weaponize everything in this deck, including the lands. And that's, even if I don't, it does have ramp on it, but it's Koth of the Hammer. It's 2 red for 3 loyalty Koth Planeswalker. His +1 is tap, target mountain. It becomes a 4/4 red elemental creature until the end of the turn. It's still land. It's not exactly something I'd be attacking with and risking my lands. It's just to do it to get to the other abilities. The -2 is add red to your mana pool for each mountain you control. That just says double your mana. And then the -5 is you get an emblem with mountains you control have tap. This land deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So for the next segment, this is the equation part of the deck. And there's not too many of these, but there's enough. And the first one is Furnace of Wrath, old school. It's 1 and 3 red, 4 total. If a source would deal damage to a creature or player, it deals double that damage to that creature or player instead. So this is why I was doing a lot of multiplication earlier. 5 damage from Browbeat becomes 10. The math works weird if you have Torbran out. You actually have to take the lower amount, because I'll explain it later. Anyhow, the next one is Fiery Emancipation. It's 3 red for an enchantment. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. That's the really good one you want to get to. I do have Fire Servant in here, even though there's not a huge number of instants and sorceries, but I still think it's enough, and you can adjust this on your own. This is just my take on it. This is what I found works with my meta, and there's a ton of other things that you could put into this deck. It was really hard to just even narrow it down as far as I did, honestly. But anyway, Fire Servant is 3 red for a 4/3 elemental. If a red instant or sorcery spell you control would deal damage, it deals double that damage instead. I kind of put this in here with this because it fetches the previous card. It's Flamekin Harbinger. It's 1 red. It's a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an elemental card, reveal it, shuffle your library, and put that card on top of it. So it is a tutor for Fire Servant and another creature. I was thinking about putting a Ball Lightning in here for this also, but I decided against it. And the other card that you can get, this is the whatever section of the deck. The other card you can grab is Chandra's Incinerator. It's 5 and a red for a 6/6 elemental. So you can snatch either the Fire Servant or this with the Harbinger. And the 6/6 elemental, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn, and it has trample. So this is really good if you're using one of those pingers that hits everybody, and it just got multiplied by or added by 2. So yeah, this could cost 1 very easily. Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to a target creature or planeswalker that player controls. Weaver of Lightning. It's 2 and a red for 1/4 human shaman with reach. Whenever you cast an instant or a sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to target creature an opponent controls. Rampaging Ferocitodon is 2 and a red for a 3/3 with menace. Players can't gain life, so that key text again. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, Rampaging Ferocitodon deals 1 damage to that creature's controller. And these are cards that I like because it deals 1 damage to us and 3 to our opponents. Gutter Snipe, 2 and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Shaman. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. Firebrand Archer, it's 1 and a red for a 2/1 human archer. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Firebrand Archer deals 1 damage to each opponent. And these 2? Yep, the next 2 are where the math comes into play importantly. When you're using a doubling effect, your opponent decides the order of operation with any sort of adding of damage. So you would think you could add, say that does 1 point of damage, something does 1 point of damage, and your commander adds the 2, and so if you double that, it's 6, and that's what your opponent takes. That's not how that's not how the rules are written, and that's not how I approach this deck. The way the math works is that your opponent chooses the order of operations. So they could say, no, that 1 damage gets doubled, and then you add the 2. So you're not netting a lot, but you're still netting enough, I believe. These 2 break the formula. Because if I do 5 damage, especially to Brash Taunter, then I am now in control of how the damage is being dealt. And I can say, I want to add the damage from Torbran first, and then I am going to multiply. So you do get the maximum output, but then, because each of these creatures deals damage equal to the damage that they take to a player, you are re-multiplying that damage. So, example, if you deal 1 damage to Brosh Taunter or Mogmaniac, you could say if you have your commander out and one of the doublers out, let's just say Furnace of Wrath for the sake of comparison. 1 damage, add the 2, that's 3, times the 2 is 6, and then it's going to go back to your opponent. If they're smart, they'll double it first to 12, and then add the 2 for 14. And all you did was do 1 point of damage to it. Freaking amazing. These are all the instants and sorceries. Jaya's Greeting, it's 1 and a red. It deals 3 damage to target creature and you scry 1. A Braid is 1 and a red. You choose 1, either 3 damage to target creature or destroy an artifact. Lightning Bolt, which gets fantastic. It's 1 red, 3 damage to target creature or player. Scorching Dragon fires 1 and a red. It deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If that creature or planeswalker would die this turn, exile instead. Spark Jolt, it's 1 red, deals 1 damage to target creature or player, and you scry 1. I love attaching the scry ones to Isochron Scepter. It smooths out the deck so well. Rolling Thunder has that same pinpoint with damage there, damage there, damage there ability. It's X and a red. It deals X damage as divided as you choose among any number of targets. So even 1 to everybody is very hurtful. Magma Jet, it's 1 and a red. It deals 2 damage to target creature or player. And it has Scry 2. Blazing Salvo, it's 1 red for 3 damage to target creature, unless that creature's controller has Blazing Salvo, deal 5 damage to him or her. And this is a fun one for Indestructible. Burn from Within, it's X and a red for sorcery. Burn from Within deals X damage to target creature or player. If a creature is dealt damage this way, it loses Indestructible until the end of the turn. If that creature would die this turn, exile instead. That's the deck. And I've found that this works really well. It's a lot of fun throwing around points of damage everywhere, from Chandra Planeswalkers, from Pingers, copying things from, the Isochron Scepter. This deck has been a lot of fun to play. And it's one of those that's really, you could just kind of craft it however you want to. There's so many other cards you could put into this. It's just a good, fun red deck. So that's the end of the deck. We have coming up this week, hopefully tomorrow if I get this video downloaded in time. Tomorrow will be Strixhaven, and we'll be going through pre-con upgrades again. I'm looking very much forward to that. And until we do, keep watching, keep playing, keep casting spells, and we'll see you later.